The city below Cassandra Layton's penthouse was a sprawling tapestry of light, 1,000 tiny sparks against the deep velvet of the night. From the 35th floor, the sounds of traffic and life were swallowed by the thick, soundproof glass, leaving only a silent, brilliant show for an audience of one. She stood there often, her fingertips resting lightly on the cool pane, a queen surveying a kingdom she never asked for and could never truly leave. This was not a home, it was a gilded cage, so beautiful and expensive that most people would never see the bars. But Cassandra felt them every single day. Her husband, Damien Layton, was the man who had built the cage. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a philanthropist with a charming smile and an impossibly deep wallet. His picture was in the newspapers, shaking hands with politicians. But Cassandra knew the man behind the picture. She knew that the sharp, assessing look in his eyes in those photos wasn't just business acumen, it was a warning. He was a mafia lord, and his empire, polished and presented to the public with such care, was built on a foundation of fear and silence. Cassandra was his most prized possession, the flawless jewel he displayed on his arm at galas and charity events. She was beautiful, poised, and utterly lonely. Their dinners were a perfect example. They occurred in a dining room large enough to host 50, but only 2 places were ever set, at opposite ends of a table so long they had to raise their voices slightly to be heard. The food was prepared by a personal chef, each course a work of art. But the conversation, if you could call it that, was a series of reports. The Andrews deal closed, Damien would say, not looking up from his tablet. The charity luncheon is on Thursday. Be ready by noon. He spoke to her like she was an employee, a very important one, but an employee nonetheless. There were no questions about her day, no shared laughs, no gentle touches. His affection was a transaction, a cold kiss on the cheek before they stepped out into public, a performance for the cameras. When they were alone, the performance ended, and the silence returned. It was on a morning after one of those silent dinners that Ethan Vale first walked into her office. Cassandra's office was her own small domain, a beautiful, sunlit room paid for by Damien but filled with her own choices. Ethan was the new secretary, hired by Damien's efficient, impersonal HR department to manage her schedule and correspondence. From the moment he entered, he was different. He wasn't intimidated by the opulent surroundings, nor was he overly familiar. He was simply present. He had a calmness about him, a pair of kind eyes that seemed to actually see her, not just the Mrs. Layton that everyone else saw. The first week was all business. He was impeccably professional, organizing her chaotic calendar with a quiet efficiency that she appreciated. But it was the small things she began to notice. He remembered that she liked her afternoon tea with a single sugar and no milk, something her previous secretary had gotten wrong for months. He would place the cup on her desk with a soft, "Here you are, Cassandra," using her first name with a natural ease that felt respectful, not presumptuous. One day, she was struggling to open a stubborn old ledger, her fingers slipping on the clasp. He was at her side in a moment. "Allow me," he said softly. His hand covered hers for just a second as he took the book, and a jolt, warm and entirely unexpected, shot up her arm. She pulled her hand back as if burned, her heart hammering in her chest. He simply opened the book, placed it gently before her, and returned to his desk without another word, but she saw a faint pink flush on his own neck. The loneliness that had been a constant, dull ache in her chest began to sharpen into something else, a dangerous and thrilling curiosity. She found herself listening for the sound of his voice in the outer office. She would glance up from her papers just to watch him work, the way he focused, the way he would sometimes run a hand through his dark hair when he was thinking. He was young, certainly younger than her, and his handsomeness was not the polished, severe kind that Damien possessed. It was open and honest, and it made her feel things she had long forgotten. The change was so subtle, a shift in the atmosphere of the room. Their professional conversations began to stretch by a minute or two. He would ask about a book on her shelf, and she would find herself explaining why she loved it. He would comment on the weather, and she would tell him how she missed walking in the rain. They were tiny, insignificant threads, but together, they were beginning to weave a fragile connection. One afternoon, Damien had called her on the office line, his voice cold and demanding about a forgotten detail for an upcoming event. She had hung up, feeling small and frustrated, fighting back tears of anger. A few minutes later, Ethan came in with a fresh cup of tea. He placed it on her desk, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "I hope you're okay," he said, his voice low and gentle. That simple sentence, the genuine care in it, undid her. It was the first time in years anyone had acknowledged that she might not be okay. She just nodded, unable to speak, the warm, fluttery feeling in her stomach spreading through her whole body. That night, lying in her vast, empty bed, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She replayed the sound of his voice, the look in his eyes. She imagined, for a wild, forbidden moment, what it would be like to be held by someone who looked at her like that. The guilt was immediate, a cold wave following the heat. She was married. Her husband was a powerful, dangerous man. These thoughts were not just disloyal, they were a threat. But the seed had been planted, and in the fertile soil of her loneliness, it was already starting to grow roots. Damien, ever perceptive to changes in his environment, noticed her distraction a few days later. Over another silent dinner, he put down his wine glass and fixed her with that piercing gaze. "You've been quiet lately," he stated. "Remember who you are, Cassandra. Remember your place." The words were not a reminder, they were a command, and they made the bars of her beautiful cage feel tighter than ever. The warmth Ethan had sparked in her was now mixed with a chilling fear, creating a confusing, thrilling, and terrifying storm inside her heart. The air in Cassandra's office, once a space of quiet business, now crackled with a tension so palpable it felt like the moments before a summer storm. Every day became a delicate dance, a series of glances and gestures that carried more weight than any words they dared to speak. Cassandra found herself constructing her mornings around the moment Ethan would arrive, the sound of the office door opening a small, significant event in her day. She began choosing her dresses with a new, secret purpose, noticing the way his eyes would linger for a half-second longer when she wore a particular shade of blue or the deep crimson she had chosen one daring Tuesday. It was a silent conversation, a game of exquisite torture where the rules were unspoken and the stakes were terrifyingly high. Ethan, for his part, became bolder in his subtlety. He found reasons to be near her, to ask a question about a file that required him to lean over her shoulder, his presence a warm, solid thing she could feel inches from her skin. The scent of his clean, simple cologne would linger in the air after he moved away, a ghost of a touch that haunted her. He started bringing her a small, perfect flower from the vendor on the street corner, placing it in a thin glass vase on her desk without comment. It was never a romantic rose, always something else, a bright daisy, a cheerful sunflower. It was a gesture of admiration that was also a gesture of innocence, and that made it all the more disarming. They existed in a bubble of their own making, a world contained within four walls where the only things that mattered were the space between their hands and the unspoken words hanging in the air. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon. The sky had turned a bruised purple, and rain lashed against the windows, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of gray and green. They were alone, the rest of the staff having left early. The usual sounds of the city were muffled by the downpour, leaving the office in a hushed, intimate silence. Cassandra was standing by the window, watching the rain, feeling a strange mix of peace and restlessness. Ethan was supposed to be gone, but he was still at his desk, seemingly finishing up some work. She could feel his gaze on her back, a physical pressure. Finally, she heard his chair push back, and his quiet footsteps approach. He stopped a few feet behind her, his reflection faint in the glass. "Cassandra," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She turned to face him. The look in his eyes was no longer one of subtle admiration. It was raw, open, and full of a desperate kind of hunger. It was the look she had seen in her dreams, and it stole the breath from her lungs. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, the words seeming torn from him. "I can't sit out there and pretend that you're just my boss. I think about you all the time. When I'm at home, when I'm trying to sleep, it's always you." The confession hung in the air between them, dangerous and beautiful. For a single, heart-stopping moment, Cassandra wanted nothing more than to step into it, to let his words wrap around her and pull her from the cold isolation of her life. But then, the reality of her situation crashed down upon her with the force of a physical blow. Damien's cold eyes, his warning about her place, the unspoken threat that emanated from him like a chill, it all flooded back. The fear was instant and paralyzing. To protect him, she knew she had to be cruel. She wrapped herself in the cold, imperious demeanor she used at Damien's business functions, her face becoming a smooth, unreadable mask. "Ethan," she said, her voice sharp and clipped, cutting through the intimate atmosphere like shards of ice. "You are my secretary. That is all. If you value your job, and more importantly, if you value your life, you will stop this. Now. Leave." The effect on him was immediate and devastating. The light in his eyes extinguished, replaced by a wave of shock and humiliation so profound it made him physically flinch. He stared at her for a second, his face pale, then gave a stiff, jerky nod. "I understand. My apologies, Mrs. Layton." He used her formal name, and it felt like a slap. He turned and walked out of the office, his shoulders slumped, not looking back. The moment the door clicked shut, Cassandra's composure shattered. Her legs felt weak, and she stumbled to her chair, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She had done the right thing, the safe thing. So why did it feel like she had just torn out her own heart? She replayed the wounded look on his face over and over in her mind, and a wave of nausea washed over her. She had lied to him, and in doing so, she had lied to herself. The rejection was a shield, and behind it, her desire for him burned brighter than ever, now fueled by a terrible, aching guilt. That night was the longest of her life. Sleep was impossible. She lay in the dark, the image of Ethan's hurt eyes seared onto the back of her eyelids. But as the hours dragged on, her thoughts shifted. The memory of his confession, "I think about you all the time," began to warm her from the inside out. It was the most honest, passionate thing anyone had said to her in a decade. She imagined what would have happened if she had been brave, if she had reached out and touched his face, if she had answered his truth with her own. In the silent darkness, shielded from the judging eyes of the world, she admitted it to herself: she wanted him. She craved the kindness in his touch, the honesty in his voice. She woke just before dawn, her pillow damp with tears, his name a silent whisper on her lips. The next morning, she dressed with a new, defiant purpose. She chose the crimson dress again, a silent message, a flag of surrender she was raising only for him. When she walked into the office, he was already at his desk, his head bowed over his work. He looked up as she entered, and for a fleeting second, before he could school his features, she saw it all: the hurt, the confusion, and beneath it, the same burning ember that refused to go out. He saw the red dress, and his eyes darkened with a fresh, intense understanding. He knew. He knew her anger had been a lie. The entire performance of the previous day collapsed in that single, shared look. The air was once again thick with everything that was unsaid, but now it was also heavy with the knowledge of her dishonesty and his forgiveness. The following week was an exquisite new kind of agony. The pretense of normalcy was gone. Now, every glance was a confession. Every time their fingers brushed when she took a file from him, it sent a jolt of lightning up her arm, a shared secret that was both thrilling and terrifying. They began to find themselves alone in the office more and more, both of them working late on the same nights. The professional facade was a thin veil, and they were both standing on opposite sides, waiting for someone to tear it down. The city lights would twinkle on outside, witnesses to the silent drama unfolding in the glass-walled room. The kindling of the previous weeks had been doused with the gasoline of her false rejection and was now ready to be set ablaze by a single, brave spark. The world, for Cassandra, had fractured into two distinct realities. There was the public one, a life of polished marble and silent cars, of smiling next to Damien at events where her every gesture was watched and measured. In this world, she was Mrs. Layton, a beautiful accessory, her voice a soft murmur, her feelings locked away in a vault deep inside her. Then, there was the secret world, a world that existed in the hushed twilight of her office, in the space between heartbeats when Ethan's hand would find hers. This world was built of stolen moments that shone like stolen diamonds, brilliant and precious and filled with a terrifying, intoxicating light. It was a world of warmth, of whispered words that were only for her, of a touch that sought to comfort, not to possess. Their first real kiss had happened on one of those late evenings. The sun had dipped below the skyline, painting the office in shades of orange and deep blue. He had been standing by her desk, handing her a final document, and she had looked up at him, and the silence between them had become a living, breathing thing. It was she who had finally broken, her resolve crumbling under the weight of her own longing. She had reached out, her fingers gently brushing against his, and that small touch had been the key that unlocked everything. He had leaned down, his movements slow, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not. When his lips met hers, it was not a kiss of conquest, but of discovery. It was gentle and questioning, a silent promise of everything that could be. It felt like the first true breath she had taken in 10 years. From that moment, their secret was sealed in a new, profound way. They became conspirators in their own private rebellion, finding hidden corners of the city for brief, furtive meetings, their conversations now filled with dreams and plans spoken in hushed, urgent tones. But a fire, no matter how carefully contained, gives off smoke. And Damien Layton was a man who could smell a single wisp of it from a mile away. He began to notice the subtle changes the way a predator senses a shift in the wind. The new lightness in her step, the way a ghost of a smile would sometimes play on her lips when she thought no one was looking, the faint, unfamiliar scent of a simple cologne that sometimes clung to her clothes. He said nothing at first. He was a man who dealt in proof, not suspicion. But the air in their penthouse grew colder, his silences more pronounced and more threatening. He started asking pointed questions about her schedule, his eyes narrowed as he listened to her answers. One evening, he mentioned casually that he had assigned one of his most trusted men, a silent, grim-faced man named Silas, to act as her new driver. It was not a courtesy, it was a sentence. She was now under constant, watchful guard. The fear became a constant, cold companion, coiling in her stomach alongside the warmth Ethan provided. The stolen moments became more rushed, more desperate. The joy was now tinged with a sharp, metallic taste of panic. She tried to pull back, to tell Ethan they needed to be more careful, that it was too dangerous. But the heart, once awakened, is a stubborn organ. The mere sight of him, the sound of his voice, would melt her resolve. They were trapped in their own desire, a moth and a flame, both knowing they were flying too close but unable to resist the light. The end began not with a bang, but with a silence. It was a Tuesday. Ethan had texted her that morning, a simple, coded message they used, looking forward to reviewing the ledger today. It meant he would stay late. Her heart had fluttered with a mixture of anticipation and dread. But as the afternoon wore on, a strange unease settled over her. He had stepped out for a quick lunch and never returned. At first, she thought little of it, assuming a personal errand had detained him. But by 3 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a message from him. It was only 2 words, a problem. Then, nothing. Her own messages went unanswered. Her calls went straight to a robotic voicemail. The cold fear in her stomach solidified into a block of ice. By the next morning, when his desk was still empty and his phone was still dead, the ice had spread to her veins. She moved through her day like a ghost, her ears ringing with a silent scream. She tried to call his apartment building, but the line was mysteriously disconnected. Every instinct screamed at her that this was Damien's doing. That night, she confronted him. She found him in his study, sitting in a large leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was calm, perfectly composed. The room was silent except for the quiet clink of the ice in his glass. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice trembling, all pretense gone. Damien took a slow sip of his drink, his cold eyes regarding her over the rim of the glass. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Your secretary," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "Ethan Vale. It seems he has decided to pursue other opportunities. Far away from here." "What did you do to him?" she whispered, her legs feeling like they might give way. He placed his glass down on the desk with a definitive click. "I did what was necessary to protect what is mine," he said, his voice low and utterly devoid of emotion. "He was a problem. And I deal with problems. Permanently." He leaned forward slightly, and the mask of the civilized businessman fell away completely, revealing the ruthless Mafia lord beneath. "You are my wife, Cassandra. You have always been mine. You will remember your place, and you will never, ever speak of this again. This matter is closed." The finality in his voice was more terrifying than any shout. He offered no details, no proof. He didn't need to. The truth was in the chilling emptiness of his eyes, in the absolute certainty of his tone. Ethan was gone. Not transferred, not fired. Gone. The word echoed in the vast, hollow space that her heart had become. She turned and walked out of the study, her body moving on autopilot. She made it to her bedroom, closed the door, and slid to the floor, but the tears would not come. She was numb, frozen solid from the inside out. She had traded a lifetime of gilded loneliness for a few weeks of stolen sunlight, and the price had been a young man's life. Weeks bled into months. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. She was a doll again, perfectly dressed, perfectly behaved, moving through her life in a gray, soundless haze. A new secretary, an older, efficient woman, was hired. No one in the office ever spoke Ethan's name. It was as if he had never existed at all. One evening, she found herself standing once more before the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights twinkling below, indifferent to her suffering. She looked at her own reflection in the glass, a beautiful woman in a beautiful cage. Her eyes were empty. Her trembling hand rose, and her fingers brushed against the cold gold of her wedding ring, the symbol of her prison. She thought of Ethan's smile, his kind eyes, the feel of his hand in hers. She had traded it all for this silence. A single, hot tear finally escaped, tracing a path down her cheek as she stared into the endless, uncaring night, forever whispering the words that had come too late, the words that were now her eternal punishment. "Forgive me, Ethan." This is a story of forbidden desire and its devastating cost. The heart wants what it wants, but some worlds have rules that cannot be broken. If you were captivated by Cassandra and Ethan's tragic romance, if your heart aches for the choices they were forced to make, then you understand the power of a story that delves into the darkest corners of love and danger. To ensure you never miss a tale of passion, sacrifice, and the secrets that bind us, be sure to subscribe. Your next obsession is waiting.